Hey everyone, and welcome to our October live event for National Quilter Circle. Once again, we have Susan Guzman back to answer all of your quilting questions. So thanks for being here, Susan.
Oh, you're welcome. Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
We're glad to have you. And we were just talking right before we went live about a topic that you've personally gotten a lot of questions on. We've seen a lot of questions on the Facebook page and stuff, and so we thought we'd start with that. If you are someone who is making a quilt and you want to submit a quilt possibly to a show, what are some things that you need to do, or how do you even go about doing that?
Well, I can tell you this. There are a lot of shows, of course, local shows, and the shows that sort of pop into my mind are like the shows that Quilts Inc. put on. So that's the organization that puts on Fall Market and Spring Market, and their shows are just amazing. But you can go onto their website and you can look at all of the requirements for whatever quilt you wish to submit. And a lot of times there's like classifications of quilts. They might have like a theme. Well, typically they do. And so you want to read very closely on all of those sort of directional
Guidelines.
There we go. That's a good word. All the guidelines, yeah. And then in addition to that, there are some sort of basic things that you should keep in mind when you're making your quilts. You, for instance, want to make sure that, the basic thought process of when you piece fabrics together is to press towards the darker fabric, okay? But that doesn't always work. What I recommend that you do, and actually I ended up, Ashley, this time I brought like a little prop with me.
Perfect.
So you see the block that I have here? What you want to do is sort of look the block over before you even piece it together. Look it over and see the different fabric colors and everything that you're placing together, and just think through the process of how you'll be, how you'll be pressing them. Sorry, I was getting a little dry throat there. But you want to be able to, for instance, right in this area is a flying geese unit. So you'll have 4 of those in this particular block. And what you'll want to do is plan out, the pressing of the light to the dark in that instance. Some other things that you're going to keep into consideration are all of the seams that sort of meet, like when you have an area where you have, like in this case, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fabrics that are coming together into a point. And you want to think through that whole process of how you want to press those out, because judges look for areas where there's a lot of bulk. So even though some quilters, so the person who actually quilts all your layers together, some quilters don't like any open seams, because when they go to do, if they do any stitch in the ditch, they're actually sewing just on the threads that are meeting those pieces, rather than if you would press to one side, you would have a base of fabric to sew to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
You just want to kind of lighten those areas, but just think through the whole process of how you'll be piecing your blocks together, and then piecing, of course, other aspects of your quilt. If you might be doing a traditional quilt and say you have a pieced border, just think through all of those aspects. That's what I do when I go to write the patterns that I write, and include pressing instructions. So that's a huge thing.
So would you get, is it a negative if they can see a darker fabric through the lighter fabric? So if you're thinking through it, should you change up your colors so maybe you don't have a really dark fabric being pressed to a really light, or is that in any way a negative against you?
Well, if you think about it, if you're pressing, let's say you're pressing a dark towards a light, you're not really going to be seeing, the only thing you're going to be seeing is the lightest or how should I explain this?
sort of the shadowy of the lightest
Yeah,
fabric.
it's really more of a shadow than anything. And quite frankly, if you're using the right color of batting, you're really not going to see it for the most part. So I just wouldn't be so concerned about that part. Just be sure not to have the bulky seams. That's
Perfect.
really a big thing.
Okay. Another thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was actually going to also point out, make sure that all of your points, you don't sew all over those, and I would redo them. If you're planning on submitting a quilt and you notice, oh my gosh, I missed that just by a little bit, you might want to go back and change that, because it's like little tiny things like that that are taken away from the grading process.
Perfect. And that might seem like nitpicky, you know, to go back and do that. But if you sort of get in the habit of sort of quality checking yourself, like it's just going to make you better in the end anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it. Quality check yourself. Yeah.
So I guess another question to go along with that is something that I've seen on quilts that are, you know, whether they've been in a show or not, but if you go and they're, you know, presented, they're hanging, they generally have a label on them. So I want to know sort of what are the general things that you put on a label, and then just sort of a fun side question that I had the other day from someone that I wasn't entirely sure how to answer. But say you started a quilt and it took you 2 years to finish it. What year do you put on the label? The year you start it or the year you finish it?
Well, you could also, I mean, there's really no rules. You could actually put a date range if you wish, because quilt historians, if it's a very well put together quilt and it's going to be around for a long, long time, quilt historians might see some fabrics that are older than others. They do their detective work, so they know. But I mean, to me, when you finish a quilt, that's the date. But I don't think there's anything wrong with putting a date range if you wish. Then in regards to your question regarding what do you put on a quilt label?
Yeah.
Well, for instance, this small quilt that I was showing you, I happen to put a label on this one. I don't really put labels on a lot of my quilts until I give them away. But this one actually was one of my very first quilts in McCall's. Actually, I think it was the first quilt in McCall's Quilting magazine. And what I did was I put the title of what I called it, and then I said quilt designed and constructed by me, Susan Guzman of Sue's Goose Designs, quilting by, and then the quilter's name and business, and then quilt finished, hey, there you go, November 2008 for McCall's Quick Quilts 2009. Now I put a lot of details on there, but it was just also to help me remember what issues each of my quilts were in. But you can write like I've in the past included like a nice little poem that might relate to the person I'm giving it to, or some sort of a thought that I wanted to just say to them through the quilt. So just basically, if you just basically put your name, the date you finished it, maybe even who it was for, that's really the gist of what quilt historians really like for you to put on.
Perfect. We have a couple questions here, and I'll get to those in just a second. But just because you mentioned putting a personal message on a quilt, I do want to, you know, I gotta plug the videos that we have on National Quilter Circle. And there's a really fun one that Heather Thomas did, where she did some free motion quilting, and she actually in one of the borders like wrote out, I think it was maybe a poem or a saying, and it went all the way around. And you would never know it's there until she points it out, or, you know, until you really look at it and see it. So that can be a fun sort of way to add a personal message too, is to actually free motion quilt it into the quilt, which I just thought was super cool. So if you want to see that, of course it's on the site.
It's an excellent idea. And, you know, one other thing that kind of just popped into my mind was what I would strongly recommend is that if you are able to, try to make your quilt label ahead of time before you quilt or you have your quilt quilted, because there are quilts, unfortunately, people do steal them. And unfortunately, I've heard horror stories about them being stolen out in the open, whether it be at a quilt show or wherever. I mean, it does happen, unfortunately. And if you incorporate that within your quilting, you know, 9 times out of 10, you have a better chance of locating that quilt.
Right, perfect. All right, and follow up to this, someone asked, can you use fabric as a label? So I'm assuming use fabric as the base. I'm not sure what you made your label out of, but can you use fabric for making your labels?
Actually, this white part here that I ended up running that through my printer, and I got the fabric. It's like a plastic backed piece of 8.5 by 11 fabric, and I got it through Electric Quilt through their shop. I know that there's other companies that put them out there. I think June Taylor does as well, that you can get, say, like at a Joann's or something like that. But that's what I use.
Yeah, perfect. And there are different kinds. I think they even just call it fabric printer paper. And there is sew in and iron on. So just know what you're getting. So if you don't, like as soon as if you're buying the iron on one, like by accident, and you remove that paper and you don't know that it's like sticky back, you could accidentally get it in the wrong spot. So just know that there's 2 varieties of that fabric printer paper. Mary wants to know, she says, binding is my weak spot. Any hints there?
Oh, okay. Actually, someone else brought that up about actually for competitions and different shows. As far as binding is concerned, you know, there's a couple of different things you can do. At this point, when I made this, which was what did I say, back in 2008, I was actually taking I was doing the double fold binding, you know, like most everybody does these days. And I was measuring it, instead of 2.5-inch strips, I did 2.25-inch strips. And then for a long time, I went back to 2.5. And now I think I'm going back to 2.25, because there's like some extra fabric that's left over. You end up having like a space. And actually, I think, yeah, see the difference? This is 2.5. I don't know if you can see it really, but can you sort of, yeah, probably see the difference between this binding and binding? This is the top where my finger is, where my nail is. That's the top of the edge of my quilt. And from that down to the edge is the 1/4 inch. On here, there's really barely anything. There's barely any extra. And I just think it just fits nicer. It just looks nicer to me. This just kind of tends to look a little thick to me personally. There's no rule really. I mean, unless you are entering a quilt and they specifically say that, there's really no rule.
Perfect. How about some tips for mitering corners? So I have to say, I mean, I have been binding quilts for a long time, and sometimes my corners, I kind of hide them. They're not very pretty. So how do you make sure that once you fold it to the back, that those, you know, mitered corners look good on the back as well as on the front?
Well, one thing I do after I attach so let's say we're attaching the binding to the back by hand. We're sewing it to the top and we're flipping it over and then hand stitching it on. If you're going that method, actually, any way you do it, after I'm done sewing it to the front, and then you go to flip it over to the back, what I do is I take my iron and I actually press it away from, or towards, I guess, the edge. So, you know, the flap would be up here, and I just make sure that I just give it a really good pressing all the way around. And what I like to say is, you know, before these corners are stitched down, it's kind of a strange angle that's going on. I like to say what I like to call that is popping the corners, and just make sure you like punch those out really well. Go around and do that pressing. And then when you bring it over to the back, I've been using the binding clips, you know, to keep it before I hand stitch, and a lot of people now use those. Those are really nice. Excuse me, I'm trying to think what I used to use before the binding clips were around. I didn't pin them. I don't remember what I used to do. Oh, I know. I used to use those hair clips. You know, those silver hair clips.
Yeah.
Those silver, and they like bend back and forth. When one way they're like open, and then you bend them the other way, and they clip together. So I used to use those. But one other thing then, as far as getting that perfect mitered corner, it just comes with practice. And that's one of those things where I wish I could show it to you. Like, I wish I would have been prepared for that and I could show it on the video here right now. But yeah, it'll just take a little bit of practice if you've never done it before.
Absolutely. I just want to remind people, if you have questions to ask, you can type those into, it's a little chat box now. It used to sort of be a comment section, but now it's a chat box. So you can just enter those and then they will appear for us and we can work through answering all your questions. Also, there should be a little banner on your screen, either above or below the video you're watching, to remind you that we have a new challenge out. So you should sign up for and start the new challenge, which is officially starting tomorrow. We kind of did an early release last week, but it officially starts tomorrow. So do both those things. Type in your questions and sign up for the challenge. All right, our next question here. Tommy wants to know if you insure your quilts.
I do not personally insure my quilts. I probably should, because I have so many of them from all the magazine issues that I've been in. I have most of my quilts. I've given a few to family members. But I would say that if you have an older quilt, an antique quilt, or even a vintage quilt, and you feel that it's very special, then I would look into insuring it.
Perfect. Darlene wants to know, she says she's attended a number of shows where taking pictures of quilts on display was not allowed. However, within the last couple of years, I see people taking pictures. What is the deal pertaining to this?
I think it's like per show, whatever they decide is, I don't know.
Acceptable, I guess, or.
Yeah, yeah. I know that if you take pictures at quilt shows, like for instance, the one that you see when you go to market or festival in the fall, I do know that those are for your personal use only, or if you end up blogging about a show and you're showing a lot of pictures, just make sure that you write down who made it, who quilted it, because I always think that it's good to give credit to the quilter as well if it's a different person. And also where you saw the quilt, where the quilt was hanging, whatever show it was hanging.
Right.
And you kind of cover yourself there.
Right. Perfect. All right. We have another question here. Do you ever sell your quilts? And if so, how do you determine what to charge for one? That's a great question.
I'm laughing because I have tried to sell my quilts and
it's hard.
It's really hard. I'll tell you. One thing I would recommend, that if and I haven't done this, but what I would recommend is go to some gift shops in your area and ask them if you could perhaps sell them on consignment. As far as putting a price on it is concerned, there is a formula, and I apologize, I don't know it off the top of my head, but there is a formula out there where it's something like all the cost of your supplies, as well as however many hours, and then you multiply that by a number, and that's supposed to be the magic number to charge. What I would recommend is that you do a Google search and just do a quick search and just put your question out, and I'm sure you'll probably get something back in that can sort of get you at a pretty good place as to what to charge.
Perfect. And I think even just searching, so say go on like Etsy or something for handmade quilts and kind of just sort of see what other people are charging to. I mean, I don't necessarily just conform to whatever everyone else is doing, but it can kind of give you a starting point to sort of see what other quilts are going for, kind of.
You know, I did that a while ago through, before Etsy was really big, I did that through eBay, and, you know, the costs were all over the place. That's the only thing. It's kind of hard. So just try that. I would recommend. And then the other thing is, if you go on an Etsy and you see some pricing, if it feels good, right, if it feels like a good price to you, then go ahead and copy that price.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you'll kind of know too, like if they're, I mean, if you just can't keep them in stock, you know, maybe you're selling them cheap, kind of thing. If you're not selling any of them, you know, so you can kind of sort of get a feel for it too.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Julie wants to know any tips for laundering a quilt without damaging it.
I know that there are some special soaps on the market. There's actually one that you can buy at a farm store, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And Ashley, you know what? You'll have to remind me.
Okay.
I need to find out what that or go back and check that out. But
we need to post it. That way we can prove that it really is a thing.
Yeah,
and that
exactly. It's a soap actually that farmers wash their livestock with, and it's supposed to be amazing. I know it sounds kind of crazy to some of us. Some people may have heard of it, but I just can't think of the name of it right now. But that's supposed to be a really awesome soap to use, especially on like antique quilts or vintage quilts. I personally, I probably, well, I'm a rule breaker, unfortunately, and I just toss them in the wash. I like a quilt that looks like it's been loved and well worn, and so I just use my washer and the soap that I have on hand.
Do you have an agitator in your washer? Just does that matter?
Mine's the side spin one, so
Okay.
it's an agitator. Yeah, it's the
the front load one.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Front load.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you have one that's a top load that does have an agitator, is that going to ruin your quilt, damage it, anything like that?
Just think of it this way. I mean, that's something that rubs against all your clothing. You know, and your clothing does kind of fade over time and does wear down over time. So I'm sure it's not the best for it. Probably if you want to be very, very careful is to get a specialty soap and actually hand wash it like in a bathtub.
Yeah.
And then just rinse it really, really well.
Just using the shower.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Someone wants to know, what is the best and safest way to mail quilts?
Well, gosh, best and safest way. Well, insure it. I would definitely insure it. Come up with a price. You know, it goes back to that pricing again. It's so funny. These chats, there ends up being like a certain theme if you go back and watch any of our other ones. But anyway, what I would recommend is put your quilt in, you know, the giant plastic Ziplocs that you can find. I would put them in one of those because you don't want it to get wet. And then place it in a box, seal it up very well. Take clear tape and just make sure you cover all of the seams of a box. I get a little, I don't know, particular when it comes to things like that because I don't want my quilts to get damaged in any way. And when you go to write your label on, if you're using a marker, put tape over the marker too, because I always have fears. I've had U.S. Postal Service several years ago. It's been a little while, but I had one quilt that got lost. It ended up, we found it, but I sent it 2-day mail using one of their, the U.S. Postal Service boxes, and it got lost. They just couldn't track it down, and it just kind of eventually showed up. But so that's what I would do. I would just wrap it very, very well, cover your label with clear tape just to make sure that, you know, it's going to stay in place. Plus, it won't get watermarked or anything like that if you're using a marker, and insure it.
Absolutely. It doesn't tell me who asked that question, but I have to, my mom is one who's been mailing packages lately, and she lives in a state, we'll say, that she tends to get boxes lost all the time. So sometimes it's just unluckiness as well. But so she's always making sure that she's tracking it, so she knows if it's going like where it's supposed to be going. And if it, you know, like you said, 2-day mail, if it doesn't show up when it's supposed to, like start letting them know right away that, you know, it's not where it's supposed to be, so they can also, you know, be on the lookout for a loose box.
Yeah, and you know what? I was the answer to the question. I had U.S. Postal Service in mind, but you know, of course, look into. Personally, I feel that like UPS is safer. I hate to say it, but just from past experience.
Well, and they deal with more of boxes and bigger packages, you know, as opposed to just your everyday mail kind of thing too.
Right.
Yep. Perfect. All right, we have a couple little things here. I don't know if these are going to jog your memory or not, but somebody wants to know, is the soap maybe called Orvis? Or another one said maybe Gall.
Oh, I'm glad you said Orvis is a soap that I have heard works well. That's not the one I'm talking about, but I've heard that that works very, very well too. Maybe it is. Gosh,
we're gonna track this down and we will post it. Yeah.
I have heard of Orvis, and I've heard that Orvis works very well.
Okay. Well, we will for sure find out which one you're talking about though, and we'll put that up.
Yeah.
All right. Our next one. How would you store an old or antique quilt?
Well, what is recommended is that if you do fold it, that every now and then that you refold it in a different direction, just to sort of alleviate like permanent folds. And then I've also seen people take pool noodles, roll it on those.
Okay.
So it's a really good idea even to roll it. I've also known quilters who lay them flat on guest beds. You know, if they don't have guests a whole lot, that's a really great place to store them. So I would say really the best thing to do is to roll them if you're able to and you have the room to do so. Perfect.
Just because I know we have a video on the site, one of our researchers, Kelly Hansen, does one on how to fold quilts for storage. It's sort of a different folding technique, not just, you know, in half and then in half again. So, but like, I think she does even mention the same thing you do to sort of refold in different ways so there isn't permanent creases, but this is sort of just a different way to fold it. So that might work as well.
Yeah, and just one other thing to add to that.
Yeah.
If you have any old sheets, that's a good, clean old sheets, that's a good thing to do, is to lay the sheet down first, lay your quilt on top of it, and then roll it up, because you don't want to put, you don't want to store in plastic or anything like that, just something that's breathable.
Perfect. All right, Helen asks, is it okay to use a spray adhesive instead of pins in sandwiching a quilt? And if so, oh, and then also, what is the best batting to use? So feel free to answer whichever one you want first.
Oh, okay. Well, as far as spray adhesive, that's what I use and I don't do a lot of my own quilting, but that's what I use. I love the 505 spray, but there's also a couple of sprays that I've used. Actually, I think there is a June Taylor one that I've used in the past, and that worked just as fine. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second part to that?
What is the best batting to use, or do you have a favorite batting?
I use, oh gosh, put on the spot. I am the worst when it comes to being put on the spot, because
we're just gonna have like
the worst memory.
We're gonna have a Susan Guzman's list of names of products. She's gonna think of on the spot, but we'll have it.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's the details that I just don't, you know, it's like, whatever. But I don't mean to be flip about that. The batting that I use, I actually get it from Eric from Air Light Manufacturing, and I love his batting. I was turned on to it, oh gosh, probably about I don't know, 7 to 10 years ago, and I just love it. And he actually just sends it to me, but you can contact him. The best way to contact him is by phone, but I think his company's in Flint, Michigan. If you want to email me, Susan at suzguzdesigns.com. It's SUZGUZ, designs with an S.com. Email me and I can send that info to you.
Perfect. All right, our next one, Mary wants to know, how have you organized your quilting studio?
Oh gosh. Is
it organized?
I don't, oh gosh. You know, I kind of cringe at that, because I just love all of the quilt studios that I see. Like, look at Ashley's.
This is the only area that's done, which is why that's the frame that I'm in front of.
So Nice. Mine is actually somewhat chaotic, but like I know where everything is. And I'm usually working on probably 5 different projects at once. So I have so much going on all the time. Every now and then I stop and I get myself organized again. But basically, I have my sewing machine set up on one wall with my ironing board and iron next to it. And I actually work off of it's an old Formica top, metal sides desk that my husband got from one of his offices that they were redoing it. And it's just a really nice big table. And then behind me on the opposite wall is my cutting table. And above that are all my supplies. I have some shelving. And I have all of my thread. I love how Ashley has hers displayed. It's so pretty.
I have it color coordinated by the rainbows, you know.
Mine are in plastic see-through boxes, and I keep that on the shelving above me. And then all of my supplies, you know, like my my rotary cutter refills and that sort of thing. Everything's all right there. So I sort of keep that organized. Then I have a lot of bins that I have all my different fabrics in. And I have those, you know, a lot of times, you know, you kind of question if you're putting a new sewing room together, like how does one organize their fabrics? And they're totally, you know, different ways of doing that. I keep my solids separate. I keep collections together. If I had worked on collections in the past and I have extra, I keep those together. Some people like organize everything by color. I guess because my taste is so eclectic, I don't mix everything together because I don't want like a 1940s fabric next to like my Civil War. If I'm designing, I want to be able to look at what goes together. So that's why I just end up pulling from various areas, or I keep certain styles together. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. And I think it's totally like you said, as long as you know where things are, it works good. I have to say, I loved my cube shelves until my son was of walking age, because now he hangs out down in here. And so that's why there's nothing on the lower cube shelves within his reach, because it just goes everywhere. So if you're like me and have somebody that can, you know, easily pull things off the shelves, I like the storage container idea that you were using. I think I need to invest in some. All right, Darlene says, are handmade quilts more valued in terms of grading or rating as opposed to machine-made quilts or machine-quilted quilts?
So either hand quilting versus machine quilting?
Yeah. Yep.
I believe there is. I'm not an expert in that. That's a really, really good question, and I apologize. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I think that's a really good question, because if you think about it, think of machine quilting and how detailed it can get. I mean, just I've seen some amazing ones out there, and I realize it takes a lot more time to do hand quilting, but you know, there's so many different variables. I don't know today if there really is that much of a difference in price.
So in terms of, say you're going to submit it to a show, do you know off the top of your head if there is, say, a machine quilted category versus a hand quilted category in terms of judging?
I know that in the past there has been. I haven't looked at any show criteria in a while, so I really don't know if that's changed. Yeah, that's a good question. I would say if someone has that question, just to write into wherever you're submitting your quilts to, and they'll be able to help you.
Perfect. All right, our next one here. Have you used the Accu quilt machine, and is it worth the money and time?
I have used it. I tried it. Let me put it that way. I've tried it. It's a really awesome machine. If you are, you know, you want to make quilts quickly, it's really a great time saver. I've heard different comments over the years of, you know, it can, some people look at it as it can waste some fabric, but I think it's just a matter of you really need to plan out how you're going to make your cuts. But I've heard they're really awesome machines.
I've also tried them out a couple times. I kind of wish I had one, but I don't. But maybe one of these days I'll invest in one.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many neat things that you can do with it, even cutting strips for binding, and as well as borders.
Yes, absolutely. All right, our next question. What are your suggestions on threads for quilts? Like what kind of thread do you use for piecing?
Yeah, why don't we go that route? Okay, so for piecing, I use, personally, I use a 40 weight thread, and I actually represent Aurifil threads. And I think maybe twice since, I think I've been representing them since 2011. And maybe twice, and it was early on, I had a thread break, but I think it really was my machine that did it, that something got hung up. I've never had an issue with that thread breaking. It's just a really, really good quality. There's a lot of great quality threads out there, though. I don't want to take away from any other companies because there's some really good companies out there. But as far as quilting a quilt, you can use 40 weight. I recommend that you use, gosh, I've been saying 40 and I mean 50. I've been using 50 weight. 50 weight's a lot thinner, and 50 weight really is, what's nice about that is it kind of sinks into the fabric and it sort of disappears. Use 40 weight for quilting a quilt top together. Okay. So that's basically, I mean, and again, there's really no like strident rules, but basically that's what the industry looks at.
Yeah. And I was just looking to see, normally there's a little label here that has, you know, what it is, 40, 50, 60, and I apparently tore mine off. So I was going to show you, but it's not, I'm sure there's one behind me, but if you don't know, and if you can't just, you know, tell by looking at it, it should say it on the little sticker on the label.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question here. Early on, I washed a lot of my fabrics. Now I've changed and I don't wash. Could I use washed and not washed fabrics together in a quilt?
You can, but I would highly recommend that you don't do that. I think if you're using a combination, go ahead and wash the ones that are not washed. I would do that. There are different levels of shrinkage, and it's just going to turn into a mess if you don't keep everything copacetic.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, we have another question here, and then I'm actually going to do something that you did to me once, which is run and plug my computer in, but I promise my charger's right there. But while I'm doing that, somebody wants to know, what is the type of sewing machine that you use?
Well, I actually use a couple of different sewing machines. My main sewing machine that I use is a Juki, and I think it's like a 2200 or something like that. It is for quilting, and it's a workhorse. What's really great about it is that it's just straight stitch, and because of all the quilting that I do, I've just loved it because I don't have to worry about anything but just sewing like a mad woman. Another machine that I have is a Hough, and I use that for any specialty stitches. Also, on occasion, I do create quilt labels with it with the alphabet, which is really nice. And then I have a vintage machine. It's a cool little vintage machine. You can see it actually on my Instagram page. It's that really pretty, like 1950s green. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that. I don't see that color around me right now, but it's a really, really pretty sort of spring color. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I ended up buying that off of eBay, and it's just this awesome little vintage machine. And I take that like if I'm going to sew at a friend's house or something like that.
So I'm glad to know that you also have multiple machines, because when I talk about the machines that I have, sometimes people are like, why do you have so many? But they do all have different purposes. So I also have a Hough, which I like that one. I don't use it as much. I have to admit that my brother machine is the one that I use like all the time. And I think it's just because it was the first one that I bought, and you kind of get used to one.
Yeah.
You kind of stick with it. But I also have a vintage one. I'm going to have to post it and we'll compare our vintage machines. But I have a Morse, it's right over there, a Morse dressmaker. I don't even think Morse is around. It actually runs on a rubber band. Like it still works. Like you plug it in, but it's got a rubber band and it's like robin's egg blue.
Oh, pretty.
Things back then were so pretty.
Nice. I know.
I mean, not that mine's not pretty, but it's white, you know.
There are some really cool ones out there.
Yeah. Yep. Perfect.
You know, and then the other thing, like I've had other machines as well, and I've just sold them. Like I sold one a couple of years ago at a garage sale, and I bought it at a garage sale for like $10. Well, they're probably the same, you know, but it was like sometimes they just come and live with you for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you get some use out of them. Yeah.
Right.
All right. We have a few more questions that are coming in, and we still have some more time. So if you've been holding on to a question, or if you've thought of one since you've been hearing us talk, definitely put that into the chat box, and we'll continue working our way through our questions. But Darlene asked, is there a copyright issue when it comes to making or claiming a quilt as being your own work when maybe you use somebody else's pattern or design?
Yeah, that is a problem. As far as copyright is concerned, it's a really touchy subject. It's kind of like talking politics, I'll be honest with you. But basically, if you design a quilt and you publish it, so you turn it into a pattern, or you send it into a magazine and it's published, that is your copyright. Anytime you take a written pattern that you wrote and you mail it, or you can also register it with the US government as well. But basically, if you would mail that pattern anywhere, that essentially is a copyright as well. But you know, quilting is just kind of touchy because there are blocks that have been around for ages, and you can't claim that those are yours, but you can freely use those within your own quilting designs, and then copyright the compilation of different blocks that you put into your quilt.
Right.
So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I'm also going to say, I feel like there's a difference in so say you just designed a quilt for us for the last challenge, the Lexington Sampler quilt. You're the designer, but if I'm going to post the picture, I can say, I pieced this, but it was designed by, and credit you. Like you're not saying I made it.
Right. That is the right thing to do, because you wouldn't believe the hours that are put into designing. I mean, like for instance, when I design, I pull in digital swatches into the electric quilt software. Mm-hmm. I have to resize those. You just wouldn't believe how much time is taken just to do that and then pull them into the program. Mm-hmm. And then once you start fooling around and, you know, laying out your design and deciding what you want to do and then plugging in color, and then you're recoloring and recoloring and recoloring. Then you write the pattern. Then you make your quilt. Then you may or may not lay out your pattern and have that printed. I actually do my own illustrations, so that's another thing. Then the pattern goes through probably 10, 12, maybe even more edits, just to get it right, to get it written right. So there's a lot of time and effort that goes into that. And it's just out of respect. It's really awesome for the designer. You can point people in their direction. Like like your example, Ashley, you can also include somebody's website just to sort of send people their way. It's just a really nice sort of neighborly thing to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Definitely just giving credit where it's due. I mean, obviously, if you're the person who's pieced it, like you should get, credit for putting in the work of piecing it, but, make sure you say that you pieced it, you didn't design it, kind of thing. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Someone says, how do you fold your smaller pieces of fabric for storage?
Oh gosh. I'm just thinking. I guess let's say like a fat quarter.
Mhm.
I just like fold it once, fold it twice, and then I think it's like uh, fold that strip in half and then a half again, and then I store those like in my boxes, that my clear boxes.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I fold it. When I have like yardage, I well, it just sort of depends. If I have enough yardage and I have some of those bolt pieces, that hold the bolt, the
The little cardboard pieces things.
cardboard,
Yeah.
yeah, like the cardboard base.
Mhm.
I'll roll it up with that because it's really nice. Then you don't have any folds. The thing about folding is it's really hard to get, like, if you have these folded pieces of fabric in storage for a long time, it is so darn hard to get those folds out. I
That's true.
mean, you really have to, use some sort of a spray or water or whatever and just steam those out.
Yes. I'm going to say, I was going to try and do an example because I have scraps of fabric in front of me, but we actually, so it's funny that someone just asked this question. So we just started doing, if you don't follow National Quilter Circle on Instagram, you should start doing that. And we give weekly tips. And so our tip that went out just on Monday was how to fold scraps of fabric. And so the tip was to fold it using a template. So I just have a ruler in front of me, but the template that we showed was, you mentioned fat quarters, one of those little cardboard squares from the fat quarter. So I'm just going to do this real quick in front of me and then hold it up. But so use your ruler or whatever your template is to fold it around it. So it's going to seem like an odd size when you fold it, but then you're going to have all of your scraps of fabric that are exactly the same size, and then you can stack it. So I've done it with bigger squares behind me, but so that's the way I keep my stacks of fabric from not teetering over, is to make sure that they're all folded the same way. So yeah, use a little template. But to see a better visual of that, you should probably follow us on Instagram.
You know what, Ashley? That's a really great idea. And then I have another tip. Like if you have little tiny pieces, what I do with mine is I put those in either different bags, which really isn't the best solution. You probably should get some sort of a clear plastic, but I separate them by color. And that way, when I'm just like playing around, I have a few minutes and I just want to do sort of improvisational piecing. I have them all ready and I know where to go to pick and choose what I want to work with.
Yes, that's a great idea. I should do that. I should be a little bit more organized. Our next question here, I was trying to find, I just found it. Oh, do you ever get, Melissa wants to know, do you ever get quilter's block and how do you handle it?
Yeah, I guess it has happened to me before.
You mentioned your improvisational piecing. I'm wondering if something like that helps.
Yeah, I think if you're just able to sort of walk away, if you're kind of getting stuck, whether you're designing on your own or whatever, I would just sort of walk away. Another thing is to whatever interests you from an art standpoint, maybe start doing some searches. If there's a certain way that you like to quilt, if you're a modern quilter, maybe just go out and look for any images out on the internet for modern quilts. It can kind of inspire you. Just paging through magazines. I get a lot of my own inspiration from a design standpoint through fashion magazines and also interior design magazines. There's different elements, say like in a fabric that's on a chair, or window treatments. Like prints that are actually hanging on the wall. There might be some elements, but just like really study images, and you can start getting inspiration that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Mary wants to know, if you are using flannel to make a quilt, do you need to have a stabilizer behind it so that it doesn't stretch?
No, I'm not aware of that. I've never had any issues with flannel. I just treat it like any other fabric. Of course, it's a little bit thicker, but gosh, I love working with flannel.
I do too. I actually they're sitting, everything is sitting like just out of my reach, but I have a couple baby quilts that I just did and another one up on the design wall. And I made those out of flannel too. And it's just so nice. It's really easy to cut and easy to work with, but it definitely does stretch a little bit. So in terms of working with it, as well as we'll just throw in, working with something that's cut on the bias, like how do you make sure that you don't distort those fabrics?
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, anything that you're working with that might be able to distort in any way, it is good to get a stabilizer.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, like if you're working with biased edges, you just have to be very careful with those and just try not to stretch or anything like that. Just handle them with kid gloves.
Right.
That's what I like to recommend.
Perfect. All right. Arna says, is there a sewing machine with a large quilting area, but not as big of a purchase as a long arm machine? And then she says, handy quilter, question mark.
Well, actually, I think that their Handy Quilter actually sells a machine now that has a big throat area, and it's not as expensive as a long arm machine. The one that I use, I would recommend. And I think I said the number is 2200. It might be 2010. I think the number is 2010 Juki 20.
We're going to add that to your list of things.
I think that's what it is. Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. I just have such a bad memory. And I apologize. I'm looking at my image and it's getting dark. It's not as dark here personally. I'm looking at you, Ashley, and you're nice and bright. And I'm a little dark here. I'm going to have to figure something out for the future.
Well, it's because we're in Colorado and it's getting dark out, earlier. I have to follow up to that. So, obviously there is a long arm machine, which is where you actually move in the machine and it's on those big rails, but there is such a thing as a mid arm machine, right?
Yes, there is.
Okay. Yeah. So what is that if someone's not familiar?
Mid arm machine is like one that you can sit down at a table and use. Mm-hmm. So it's just not as long. The throat itself isn't as long. So that's what those are. And you can just go out and either at your local quilt shop or because some local quilt shops sell machines, or an independent sewing machine business. Like we have Rocky Mountain Sewing, sell just sewing machines and vacuum cleaners. So such as that.
Yeah. And so a mid-arm is just like in between your regular and your long arm machine. And if you want a visual of what a mid-arm machine looks like, we have a video on National Quilter Circle where Sherry Driver demonstrates how to use the Handy Quilter Sweet 16. And so she does some quilting on that. So that's sort of an idea of what a mid-arm is. And I know you know that instructor as well. She does a wonderful job.
Yes, she's awesome.
Yeah. All right. Melinda says, is it okay to use different materials such as cotton with flannel or cotton with denim, all within the same project?
Absolutely. You can definitely do that. I would pre-wash because you have like such different shrinkage percentages on each one of those fabrics. If you would want to use all three of those, I would just pre-wash those.
Yep, absolutely. And of course, we have a video on National Quilter Circle. Sometimes I sound like a broken record here, but Heather Thomas does a fun video where she shows just a wide variety of tons of just different, some fabrics I'd never even heard of, and how you can sort of use them all together in the same quilt. So it's definitely doable if you want to sort of make a big combination of different fabrics in your quilt. And it doesn't necessarily, I think a lot of times when people think of different fabrics in a quilt, they think of crazy quilts, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a crazy quilt. You can still have different fabrics within a quilt if you want to do that.
Definitely. All
right, and next one, do you prefer quilting with a thread that matches the fabric color or one that would stand out?
I think that's a personal preference. Personally, I like one that sort of blends in. And I usually go for a neutral myself. But certainly, if that type of a style appeals to you, to use a colored thread, say like a red thread on a white, now on white fabric, that is pretty extreme, but just as an example, go for it.
Yeah. And I think, like you mentioned, it goes to your personal preference, but it also depends on, Do you want the quilting to be the star of your quilt, or do you want the piecing to necessarily be the star of the quilt? Because if you, like your example, use that red thread on the white, your eye's going to be drawn to that quilting. And if you did really, really intricate piecing, it might kind of like fall to the wayside a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
So we have a few more minutes. So if you have any last burning questions you want to get in, go ahead and put that in the chat box and we will answer a few more. I do want to say again, if you're looking at the screen where the video is, there should be a banner that says there's a mystery challenge happening, which is because it is, and you should sign up for our mystery quilt challenge. That's our newest challenge. It's going to officially start tomorrow. We did kind of do a little early release last Friday. This is going to be a fun one, so it's a mystery, so you don't get to see what it looks like until the end. So in terms of a mystery quilt, have you ever done one?
I have, well, yeah, actually I taught one. You mean
okay.
Personally made one?
Yes.
I have not, no.
So if you were approaching a mystery quilt, because we're having people that are having an issue with not being able to see the whole quilt and being able to sort of visualize where things go. So how do you sort of let go from that and just enjoy the process and trust that the designer, you know, designed a good quilt?
Yeah, actually, and who was the designer?
Toby Lishko.
Yeah, Toby used to do a lot of quilts for McCall's Quilting, so I know of her. We don't know each other real well, but she's an awesome designer. And I would put full faith in that she knows what she's doing. She's been in the industry for a long time. She's a delightful lady. And just, you know, sometimes you just have to sort of let it go, let the control go, and just let her do her thing. And that's really the fun part of the process, is the fact that it's a mystery.
Yeah, I think so too. I have a hard time keeping a secret, so it's kind of like a bummer that I've seen it because I really want to tell everybody, but I'm trying to hold it in. All right, we're gonna do one last question, a fun question, because it is October, and we won't see you again until November, so it's after Halloween. So if you are going to make a Halloween themed quilt, what is something Halloween-ish or holiday themed that you would for sure add into a Halloween quilt?
Well, one thing you could do is, of course, add any elements such as a ghost or some sort of a, I don't know, Frankenstein figure, or pumpkins and cats, scary cats. There are a lot of patterns out on the internet that you can find this time of year and put together real quickly. I'll tell you, I bought a panel. It was, I think it was last year, and I haven't been able to get back to it. But I cut out all the pieces, and what I did was I laid it all out, and I started planning that I'm doing half square triangle patches around like 2 sides of each one of these. Or maybe on another one, I'll just do a strip. So it's really fun even just to take a sketch pad and just sort of plan things out. So yeah, this is a fun time of year to make a Halloween quilt for sure.
Okay, one last follow-up and then we'll be done. But so say you're going to make, because I have a hard time with, I have quilts and I want to be using them all the time. And obviously if I make this very Halloween themed quilt, or say a very Christmas themed quilt or whatever, you're not going to have it out all the time. So what do you do with your themed quilts when they're not relevant to the current season?
I have actually a bench in our hallway, in our front hallway, and that has storage underneath, and that's where I put my seasonal quilts.
Perfect. So even if you're not going to leave it out all the time, definitely still make it. And if you make a Halloween themed quilt, we definitely want to see it. So post pictures on our Facebook group page. Again, follow us on Instagram, especially if you want to see that fun little clip on how to fold your fabric squares and get other fun tips that come out every Monday. We're going to be doing those. And then, of course, sign up for the challenge. And if you do that, join our Facebook group page, the NQC Quilt Block Challenge Facebook page. We are in all of those places and always wanting to interact with you guys and answer all of your quilting questions. So even if you didn't get them to Susan tonight, she'll be back again next month and answering more questions, or of course, submit those to us at any time. And we are happy to help you enjoy quilting.
Yeah,